January 1975, Boston, Massachusetts. A mobster walks into the FBI's field office carrying information about a rival gang. The FBI believes they're recruiting him as an informant. They're wrong. He's recruiting them. Over the next 16 years, Whitey Bulger will murder at least 19 people. He'll run the largest criminal enterprise in Boston history. He'll control drug trafficking, loan sharking, and extortion across the entire city. And he'll do it all while being paid by the FBI, protected by the FBI. December 1994, FBI headquarters realizes what's happened. Their star informant isn't helping them destroy the mafia. He is the mafia, and he's been using them for 2 decades. By the time they move to arrest him, he's vanished with $800,000 in cash. It will take 16 years, an international manhunt, to finally bring him down. South Boston, 1940s. A neighborhood of Irish immigrants, dock workers, and families living paycheck to paycheck. Violence was currency here. Loyalty was religion. And the worst thing you could be was a rat. James Joseph Bulger Jr. grew up in the Old Harbor housing projects. By age 14, Bulger was already known to police, shoplifting, street fights, small-time robbery. In 1948, age 19, Bulger joined the Air Force, served until 1952. Within months of returning to Boston, he was arrested. Bank robbery. 3 banks across Rhode Island and Massachusetts. $14,000 total. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. He served 9 years, first at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, then Alcatraz. At Alcatraz, he met the men who would shape his future. Men who understood that the real money wasn't in robbing banks, it was in controlling territory. Bulger also volunteered for something else at Alcatraz. LSD experiments. The CIA was running a program called MK Ultra, testing the effects of psychedelic drugs on prisoners, looking for mind control techniques during the Cold War. Bulger participated in exchange for time off his sentence. The man who walked out of prison in 1965 was colder than the one who went in. Bulger returned to South Boston at age 36. The neighborhood had changed. The Italian mafia controlled most of Boston's organized crime. The Patriarca family ran operations from Rhode Island to Maine, but there was still room for an Irish crew willing to operate in the shadows. Bulger started small, loan sharking, collecting debts for local bookmakers. By 1974, Bulger controlled South Boston's criminal operations. By 1975, he had something else, an FBI handler who would protect him for the next 2 decades. Special Agent John Connolly walked into the FBI's Boston office with a mission: to destroy the Italian mafia. Connolly had grown up in South Boston, same housing projects as Whitey Bulger. They'd known each other as kids. The FBI had a program called the Top Echelon Informant Program. Recruit criminals to inform on other criminals, offer protection in exchange for intelligence. When Connolly approached Bulger, he made it simple: help us destroy the Italians. We'll leave you alone. Bulger agreed. The intelligence Bulger provided was real. In 1979, the FBI arrested 13 members of the Patriarca family, based partly on his information. In 1981, more arrests followed. Connolly's career soared. The FBI leadership in Washington loved him. What they didn't know was what was happening in Boston. Every time the FBI removed an Italian mobster, Bulger absorbed their territory. The FBI wasn't destroying the mafia. They were eliminating Bulger's competition for him. By 1980, Whitey Bulger was the most powerful organized crime figure in Boston. He controlled drug trafficking through South Boston, ran gambling operations across the city, collected extortion payments from businesses throughout the area, and he did it all with FBI protection. A year later, Roger Wheeler owned World Highlight, a gambling operation that generated millions annually. Bulger wanted control of it. Wheeler refused to sell. On May 27, 1981, Wheeler was shot once in the face at point-blank range in a Tulsa, Oklahoma parking lot. The shooter was John Martirano, a Winter Hill Gang hitman. The murder was authorized by Whitey Bulger. Agent Connolly received reports connecting Bulger to the Wheeler killing. He never forwarded them to Tulsa investigators. That same year, Brian Halloran approached the FBI, who'd witnessed Bulger discussing the Wheeler murder. Connolly's report went directly to Bulger. On May 11, 1982, Brian Halloran was shot 22 times while sitting in his car on a Boston street. The FBI's informant had just murdered a witness, and the FBI did nothing. The bodies kept piling up. Edward Connors, Thomas King, Richard Costucci, all killed between 1975 and 1985. They were connected to Bulger's organization, either potential witnesses or rivals. In 1988, Special Agent Thomas Daly questioned the arrangement. That informant intelligence seemed to flow one direction, that murders were happening around Bulger without any explanation. His concerns were dismissed. Agent Connolly had powerful friends in Washington. His cases against the Italian mafia had brought the Bureau significant positive attention. Nobody wanted to admit that the program might be fundamentally compromised, so they didn't, and the murders continued. 1990, the Drug Enforcement Administration began noticing something. Their cases in Boston kept failing. Informants would disappear. Wiretaps would produce nothing. Someone was leaking information. DEA agents suspected corruption within law enforcement. They had no idea how high it went. Massachusetts State Police had been running their own investigation into Bulger for years. Separate from the FBI, they developed informants inside his organization, set up surveillance operations, built a racketeering case, piece by piece. In 1988, they nearly had enough to indict. Then, their lead informant was murdered. Their surveillance tapes mysteriously went missing. Someone was sabotaging their investigation. They suspected the FBI. They just couldn't prove it. But in 1994, everything changed. Federal prosecutors in Boston began their own investigation. They subpoenaed FBI files on informants. What they found was explosive. Hundreds of pages documenting Bulger's criminal activities, reports connecting him to multiple murders, evidence that the FBI had protected him for nearly 20 years. In December 1994, a federal grand jury prepared indictments. The charges covered 2 decades of criminal activity. The indictments were sealed, scheduled to be executed in early January 1995. Agent John Connolly met with Whitey Bulger at a parking garage, told him indictments were coming, told him to run. Bulger went home, packed 2 bags, withdrew $800,000 from various bank accounts. He called his longtime girlfriend, Catherine Gregg, told her to meet him with her own bags packed. By Christmas morning, they were gone. January 1995. FBI agents executed arrest warrants at multiple locations. Bulger's apartment, his mother's house, known associate locations, all empty. He'd had a 3-week head start. The FBI realized immediately what had happened. Someone inside the Bureau had warned him. Department of Justice launched an internal investigation. Media coverage was relentless. The FBI's top echelon informant program, once considered a brilliant strategy, was exposed as a catastrophic failure that had enabled 2 decades of murder and corruption. Agent John Connolly was eventually charged with racketeering and second-degree murder. He was convicted in 2008, sentenced to 40 years in prison, but that came later. In 1995, the only question that mattered was this: where was Whitey Bulger? The FBI placed Whitey Bulger on their 10 most wanted list, with $2 million reward, second only to Osama bin Laden. The Bureau created a task force dedicated entirely to finding Bulger, 50 agents working full-time. They tracked his known associates, followed every possible lead. Bulger stayed ahead of them. He'd spent 20 years learning how the Bureau operated. Bulger and Catherine Gregg lived in hiding, eventually settled in Santa Monica, California, rented a modest apartment 3 blocks from the beach, called themselves Charlie and Carol Gasco. Their neighbors remembered them as quiet, friendly, but private. The older couple who took long walks together. No one suspected they were living next to one of America's most wanted criminals. FBI tried everything they could. Age progression photos showing what Bulger might look like in his 70s and 80s. Public awareness campaigns. America's Most Wanted featured him multiple times. Billboards in major cities. Nothing worked. Years passed. 2000, 2005, 2010. The task force grew smaller. Some agents thought Bulger might be dead, but a core group refused to give up. They knew he was still out there, still alive, still careful, and ahead of them. What they needed was a different approach. 2011, the Bureau changed its strategies. Instead of focusing on Bulger, they focused on Catherine Gregg. They created a publicity campaign aired in 14 cities. Someone would remember her. They just needed one person to make the connection. That same year, a woman in Iceland saw the commercial while watching American television online. She'd lived in Santa Monica years earlier, recognized Catherine Gregg. She called the FBI tip line immediately. The agents confirmed the address: Princess Eugenia Apartments, Santa Monica, California. They'd been living there for 15 years. The same apartment, 3 blocks from the beach, hidden in plain sight the entire time. On the evening of June 22nd, an agent knocked on Bulger's door, posed as a maintenance worker, said there'd been a problem in the storage area. Bulger took the bait. As Bulger entered the parking garage, FBI agents moved in from 3 directions, guns drawn. Bulger didn't resist. He got on his knees, put his hands behind his head. At 81 years old, after 16 years as a fugitive, James Whitey Bulger was finally in custody. Inside the apartment, agents found Bulger's life on the run. $822,000 in cash, hidden in the walls. 30 firearms, including assault rifles and handguns. Fake identification documents from multiple aliases. Hollowed-out books containing more cash. They also found something else, a handwritten list. Names and addresses of FBI agents who'd worked his case. Even in hiding, Bulger had been keeping track of his enemies. Catherine Gregg was arrested immediately. She would later be sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for harboring a fugitive. In June 2013, the trial of James Whitey Bulger began in Boston federal court. The charges were extensive: racketeering, extortion, money laundering, weapons violations, and 19 counts of murder. The trial lasted 2 months. Prosecutors called 72 witnesses. John Martirano, the hitman, admitted to 20 murders, described in detail how Bulger ordered killings, how they disposed of bodies, how the FBI protected them. Stephen Flemmi, Bulger's longtime partner, described decades of criminal activity, including the murder of his own stepdaughter. Bulger sat through it all, expressionless. On August 12, 2013, after 32 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on 31 counts, including racketeering. Guilty on 11 counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms plus 5 years. At 83 years old, James Whitey Bulger would die in prison. After his conviction, Bulger was transferred to multiple federal prisons, then to USP Hazleton in West Virginia. Hazleton was known for its violence. They transferred Bulger there anyway. He arrived on October 29, 2018. He was 89 years old, confined to a wheelchair. Less than 12 hours later, he was dead. Guards found Bulger in his cell. He'd been beaten to death. 2 inmates were eventually charged with his murder: Fotios Freddy Gaius and Paul de Calogero, another Massachusetts criminal with ties to Bulger's past. Both men were serving life sentences. They had nothing to lose. Inmates knew he was coming, knew he was the FBI informant who'd helped destroy the Boston Mafia. In prison, there's no statute of limitations on being a rat. The man who'd spent decades protected by the FBI died the way many of his victims had, violently, without mercy.